Hey y'all, welcome into this edition of Off the Front Porch, the weekly podcast exploring the Southern experience. My name is Tony Ballman, and once again, you are with me as I travel the highways and the back roads of the American South, connecting with some of the fascinating folks and visiting some of the inspiring places whose stories make living here in the South such a truly spiritual experience. Today, we once again are stopping pretty close to home for part 2 of our 3-part series spotlighting historical sites in downtown Augusta, Georgia. Last week, if you listened, we were just down the waterway for a visit at the Augusta Canal National Heritage Area Discovery Center. Well, our next stop finds us in a beautiful space, an oasis in the middle of Augusta's medical district that reminds us of a very special anniversary we're celebrating this summer. In July 1776, American colonists made the difficult decision to break away from their motherland and declare independence from the British Crown. Leaders from across the colonies would gather to sign what we now call, appropriately enough, the Declaration of Independence. One of those signers who helped launch the American Revolution with the stroke of a pen was 26-year-old George Walton. Born in the Virginia colony, Walton was a self-made leader who grew from an orphan childhood to carpenter's apprentice to military man fighting for the crown to a delegate in the Continental Congress. He eventually would resettle in Georgia and become one of the 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence to hail from the Peach State. His is a fascinating tale, and it is told and preserved in downtown Augusta in a lovely spot called Meadow Garden. That's where we are. In 1901, the Daughters of the American Revolution first opened this home of George Walton, located just off 13th Street in downtown Augusta, to tours commemorating his role in the United States fight for independence. One of the oldest house museums in America, this place is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it is a National Historic Landmark. So in this episode of Off the Front Porch, I am joined in this charming and historic home along the Augusta Canal by its director, RANSOM SCHWERZLER. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for inviting me into this beautiful home.
Well, thank you for coming to hear our stories.
Well, I'm excited. I'm a history nerd of all kinds, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here and tell this story. Let's kind of paint a picture for folks who have never been, as I have never been until today, Meadow Garden. Kind of paint the picture of this tiny sliver of grass here in downtown Augusta.
Well, it was much different when the Waltons were here. When the Waltons lived here 235 years ago, this would have been 121 acres of farmland with this little house, 2 rooms on the bottom floor, maybe some additional rooms, and 2 rooms upstairs. So a very small, early frame house, but a nice house for its day, surrounded by farmland. George Walton himself gave it the name Meadow Garden. He would write these letters and say, I'm planting so much corn and so much of the best cotton, and he would sign it George Walton of Meadow Garden. So that was clearly very important to his sense of self. And so this would have been farmland. It would have been, with this small house. Time went by. The Waltons left this area. The surviving son and his family left this area. The house was added on to, and then the canal came along, and the land and all that farmland went away. So what we have now is a home, the historic home, which you enter, which is 2 rooms that the Waltons lived in and 2 above. The extension, which we're in today, where we have interpretive rooms and interpretive areas with some hands-on activities. And we also have our education center, which includes an archives, our 2-seater outhouse, and all the other things you need when people come to visit you. But we're in a little, as you said, a little oasis in the medical district here in Augusta. So you come inside this little black fence, and this is the remnants of that, what would have been a family farm in his day.
And I walked through that black fence, and I walked, and I could feel as I was walking down the brick pathway to come here to the home, I looked up and I saw the white columns and everything else. I was like, wow, this place is, you can feel the history the moment you step through that gate, that this is a place where something special happened.
I hope so. Our historic sites give us this connection to history. Everybody's interested in it. As you said, this 250th anniversary, everybody's interested in history right this moment. But so often, having a place where someone lived, the floorboards they walked on, the windows they looked out of. There are so few homes of this age, and certainly of this significance, where someone who did so much lived here. And this house was really saved because of George Walton's, because of who he was and what he did, more than because of the architectural style or whatever, which gives us this window into time, and it gives us this place that connects people through time to those people. We often think of those historic figures as big cardboard cutouts, but as we come here, we can look at their daily lives, who they were, what they did, how they moved through the world, and that gives us such an insight into our history and into this founding era that started to build everything, as we've gone through the last 250 years. These were the starting pieces of that foundation.
Walton himself, such a fascinating character. I mean, if you look at his history, you read about his history, he was orphaned. His dad went first, his mom went second, and then he was kind of out in the world and had to make his way in the world. I think was his uncle initially was his caregiver.
His father died around the time of his birth. By the time he was 7, there were 4 Walton children that were given guardians. We don't even have a death record for Mom, but we feel certain she died around that time. And he did go to live. He and his sister, 2 of the siblings, went to live with Uncle George and Aunt Martha. Mm-hmm. And they would eventually have 13 children of their own. I think they were expecting number 4 or 5 or something when they took in 2 extras. So George did grow up with family. He got an education. We see references in the guardianship documents to books and schoolmasters. He had a pretty good start. But again, you're a part of this huge family, all these cousins. He didn't have a lot of money or really important friends or he didn't get a university education. He was educated at home with tutors. So he had to, he had to make his own way. He did apprentice with a builder. Usually I think that was like a 7-year gig for him. He only stayed in that apprenticeship with a builder there in Virginia for 2 years. He must have thought, okay, I want something different. And then he made it happen. He left Virginia, left everything he knew. He got on that horse and came down to Savannah, Georgia. Like, what must that have felt like at 18 or 19 years old?
That's a very courageous move.
It really is. It is incredibly, it's forward thinking for that age. How many of us can really plan what we're going to do even now with every advantage? How many of us can be that thoughtful about what we want to do with our lives at that age? But George goes, he apprentices with a lawyer, and really he probably had to come to Georgia for this opportunity because up in Virginia things are very formal and fussy, and it would be a lot harder to get that chance without a lot more behind you. So he goes, he apprentices with Henry Young. And again, this is the colony of Georgia. He's here in this colony studying. He's a British citizen for all the world at this point. Mm-hmm. When he's commissioned as a lieutenant, it is into the colonial militia. And the royal governor signs that commission when he first takes that step. When he takes his oath as a lawyer, he's taking an oath to the king. But again, things are heating up in the Revolution. We've thrown the tea in the harbor. The British had kind of decided they were going to make the Massachusetts colony behave. So they are put these coercive acts. And everybody's talking about those. All throughout early America, everybody in every community is talking about, and they're calling them the intolerable acts, like no. And George is in the middle of that. We see him at the earliest meetings. He is in there, enlisted among those who attend. Early in 1774, by 1775, he's putting his name. We know he must have had, he must have been terribly charismatic to do all this at such a young age, and he must have seemed so responsible, and because he's putting his name out there. They're thinking he's going to draw people in, this young man, and so he puts his name out there. He's elected to a leadership role. He's the secretary of the provincial congress. They put together all their little grassroots committees and councils and groups, and there he is, raising his hand for every single one. George did not want to leave anything out. And by the end of 1775, he's the president of the Council of Safety, really the most important of those. And January 76, they pass a resolution to arrest the royal governor. Can you imagine that step by those, that young man? Then Habersham, another young man, goes out to make the arrest. what they were doing in their time. And they didn't know how this would turn out. They did not know that we would end up, having this Declaration of Independence really even at that time, and being able to make our way through this war to be an independent country. They had no idea. It
was courageous stuff they were doing. Yeah. No doubt. I mean, so he's 25 years old when the revolution starts heating up.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm trying to transport that to modern. He would have been like the influencer of his day.
Probably. That is probably a really good reference. He probably would. Because, again, like I said, his name is out there. He's talking to people. He'd joined the local Masonic Lodge, and he's going down to Tundy's Long Room, to this tavern where everybody gets together. Like, he had to have been really drawing people in. And he's in the military, and as that military then suddenly he is not a part of that colonial militia that's a British unit. In 1775, we decide we want an army, and George Washington is our leader, and we're getting those militias, which are separate from the British troops, the loyal troops. We are getting our own colonial militias in each colony, and he's moving over and becoming part of that. They are recruiting people. He's elected in February of 76 to the Continental Congress. So he heads probably the furthest he's ever been away from home, heading up to Philadelphia. And he is enlisted to recruit troops, because we are down here. We're the least populous. We've got the least resources, the least everything here in Georgia. We are the 13th colony. If you've ever had the bourbon, that's where the name comes from. Mm-hmm. And we are the baby sister of the colonies, really. And here he is. He's going up through the colonies asking leave to recruit in North Carolina, in Virginia, where he has connections. And he's writing back, I have leave to recruit 300 troops here to try to get people to help us in Georgia. He's got finances to do that. And up he goes. Finally, he arrives in Philadelphia in time to hear John Adams' really powerful words, summing up he's getting there kind of late in June, and he hears Adams really sum up the arguments on the 1st of July. And he in later correspondence, there's a letter that he writes to Adams telling him how much that meant to him, and that really inspired him for what he would do for the rest of his life. We think of our Georgia as so kind of separate. We the revolution happened all up in the north. It's all about that, but they're so connected to what's going on, and so much a part of it. He's there to vote on and sign, to vote on the resolution. The Declaration is really our explanation of why we made the resolution for independence. It allows us to go out and get help from the French and the Spanish and the Dutch and all of these other allies. It cuts us free from the mercantile system it's so important. And they're sitting here, and they didn't know, again, how this would turn out. Like, they could have been signing their death warrants.
Yes.
And there they are. And this young man, there were 3 signers that were 26 years old, all from the South.
Yeah.
So the other 2 were from South Carolina, Rutledge and Lynch. And, oh gosh, these young men, what they were doing.
They were courageous. I mean, these were young men, as you said, who so many young men would not have that cachet to be able to move among the leaders, the revolutionary leaders, the statesmen, the thinkers, the lawyers, the people who formed the basic foundation of the revolution. I mean, even before the first shots were fired or whatever, these are people who had to think through, what is this going to mean? And he was right there rubbing elbows with them and being a part of that process. And
he's really taking advantage of these opportunities. You do see Archibald Bullock here in Georgia being a mentor for him, really. We see, and at that point, Lachlan McIntosh was another that he was really working with. And then he goes up to Philadelphia. And again, he's on some of these really pivotal committees. Because we have a small delegation from Georgia, that was probably to his advantage as this young man, because he's on the Marine Committee, he's on the War and Ordnance, he's on the Committee of Appeals, really the precursor to the Supreme Court in many ways. Mm-hmm. He's one of those 26 lawyers that were in the Congress at this time. He is actually, so you go through, he stays in Philadelphia for about a year and a half. Their terms were quite short, they were about 9 months, and he spends 2 terms in Congress in Philadelphia at this time after, as he goes up to sign the Declaration. So he will be in Philadelphia as, all of this is happening. Washington is defeated in New York. He's in retreat through the fall of 76. Everybody's getting scared. Everybody thinks the British are going to march on Philadelphia. And so in December of 1776, Congress packs up and decamps, and they go down and they will reconvene, I think it's December 20th, in Baltimore, Maryland. Mm-hmm. 3 men stay behind. Robert Morris, often called the financier of the Revolution, George Clymer, and George Walton. So here he is. This is the special committee to take care of the business of the Congress in Philadelphia. Because if it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get your mail, you're going, and again, the Congress is overseeing all of Washington's activities. This is all of the different, now we've got the Department of Defense, and we've got the 3 branches of government, and all these different, cabinets, and all of that is coming out of the Continental Congress at this point. Everything that would become our government over time is condensed in the Continental Congress. And so they are overseeing Washington and the troops and everything else. So if Washington, writes and say, hey, I need some money to pay my spies, silver if you've got it, probably Robert Morris is the one that's hunting up that silver. But George Walton, he was quite a good horseman. He's probably the one running errands. He's in the middle of this, learning from these men who are often more well-educated, much more, they've experienced in business. They are at the top crust of society, many of them. And here's this young orphan who is learning from them and connecting with them and he is building his own foundation for what he will become through his life by making these connections through the Revolution.
Ransom Schwertzler, it is very obvious that you love history.
I do.
You pull this.
I do.
I mean, you pull out these. You know the history of George Walton inside and out. And of course, we did kind of jump over to get to December of 1776. We jumped over that. There's 2 little things that happened. 3 little things that happened in the summer. The vote on the 2nd, the vote on the 4th, and then of course, a lot of people don't know this, but signing.
They didn't sign it until August 2nd. They started out. It was back in June when Richard Henry Lee made the resolution for us to be free and independent states. That was, I think, a lot more pivotal than we give it credit for. And then there were debates. And then on the 2nd, and then they got the committee of 5 that's putting together, okay, we've got to justify this. The committee of 5 puts together that first draft of the Revolution. We have in the gift shop a 2-page that's the print of that scratch-outy Thomas Jefferson's draft.
Yeah, that's where Jefferson and John Adams were doing rock, paper, scissors to decide unalienable or inalienable.
Yeah, yeah,
that was a big thing.
It is, and the teachers love that. We do a lot of field trips, and the teachers just love this because everybody needs a draft. Like when they come in and talk about, that's your sloppy copy. That's the one where you're like making, you got to work on. Don't expect it to be right the first time. Work on your work. But they were spending those days in debate, and then then the 4th. Adams thought that the 2nd was going to be the big day that we'd all remember, but the 4th turned out to be the one when they passed that vote on that final content of the Declaration, which is really the explanation for the Resolution on Independence. And again, it opens. It's like an indictment, really. So we had 26 lawyers floating around there in Congress. And those lawyers are really crafting this document, which is telling the world, we are not doing this outside of the law. We are doing this within the law as we see it. These are our reasons. You see echoes of it in the courthouse today when a grand jury gets an indictment. It is moving through and justifying our actions for the world stage. It's also justifying them for those in the colonies. It's giving them reason. It's giving them function. And it is such an aspirational document. It is bright and brilliant. All men are we have all men are created equal, and they weren't always treated that way. But gosh, hasn't it given us something to aim for? And life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a lot to ask for and a lot to hope for as we go forward.
Yes, I'm sitting here with someone who loves history. I can tell it just in the way that you passionately talk about that. It must mean something to you every day to walk into the space and know that George Walton, such a fascinating character, such a courageous individual, trod the boards in that little 2-room section next, just beyond the Signers Hall here.
It absolutely does. And I mean, so often in our modern world, I mean, here you have a great way to use technology, but so often, we have this digital veil sometimes, and, so much is, oh, you can see an AI version of someone, or you can hear their voice. Like, this is our opportunity to come together and face to face, and we get to tell people a story, and a story of a real person founded in the best scholarship we can do. And that means so much. It is such a personal connection. It is such an opportunity to share. And we always welcome our tours to be a conversation. And they can be a fascinating conversation. People people have come from around the world recently. Some gentlemen here from Germany, and we're like using Google Translate to make our way through part of the tour. But he's asking different questions than we ever think to ask, because he's approaching it from such a different place. And we love that connection and that opportunity to share history and to talk about history and explore history in a really meaningful way. And that's what we hope to do every day. I have the best job in the world that I get that chance to talk with people.
Well, I will say, I had never walked into that room over there, but when you unlocked that door and I had the opportunity to walk into that hall, and then we started talking about all the different things that would happen in that hall, from these friends of George Walton and associates of George Walton that would come and that would meet in that little parlor room that would be adapted to the occasion. And then you walk back into the bedroom area, and the little privy and that type thing. It's like, wow, this guy who was one of the founders of our country, signers of the Declaration of Independence, lived in this simple 2-room house here in Augusta, Georgia, which at the time was in the back country. I mean, this was it eventually would become the capital of Georgia and everything, but this was very much in the back country. The sense of history walking in that room is palpable. It really is.
You feel that connection.
Yes.
And so often I think everybody kind of thinks of those people who eventually became president or maybe got a Broadway musical made. Like, we think of those big marquee figures, and we think of them as these big glamorous figures. They're larger than life. They're in the movies, Young Washington, and you've got all that. But this is looking at these lives that were so much, he was prominent in his day, of a high social standing, very prominent in the government, but he was, often in debt. He was, struggling along and in this more modest home and involved in his community. And he was like people throughout those early colonies. There were people in every colony like George doing those things he was doing, that were building what we have today. And at every little step, we can connect with what would we have been doing at that time? How would we have been moving through this? What would we have done if we were in that situation? It gives us just this great little window into their world to have a place where they would have been.
I think that's one of the things that I did not expect. This is what has surprised me about this visit. I did not expect to come to Meadow Garden and actually see this as a place where young people absolutely need to come here. They need to see this, and they need to see how aspirational this can be.
Yeah.
That they can walk in this generally simple space, and they can recognize that George Walton was a man who was orphaned, who made his living with his hands, who, as you said, courageously jumped on a horse and came south into the wilderness, and by the sweat of his brow and his wild wild spirit of a 24, 25, 26-year-old man.
How courageous can you only be at 25, 26 years old?
But this is a guy who went on to become one of our founding fathers.
Yeah.
His name is on the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Every child needs to come to this place.
I think so.
And the story of George Walton, as much as the story of George Washington, as much as the story of John Adams or Thomas Jefferson, it's a story about America. It's a story about what every American has the potential to be if they're willing to work at it.
He is just the essence of possibility. You know, this young man, he could have gone such a different way. He could have trod such a different path. But he's like, no, this is what I want to do. And he made it happen. Like and put the work in to make it happen. Like it's not, every step is, and not that he didn't make his missteps, we all do. He definitely, early politics were not for the faint of heart. There's all sorts of, it's not an easy route. He was twice governor of Georgia, 3 times chief justice. He was a circuit court judge. He was a U.S. senator for like 2 whole months. Like he just didn't want to leave anything out. But it's so much the possibilities. And I said we'd love to have field trips. He had such a support for education. He was a trustee of Franklin College, which became the University of Georgia. Mm-hmm. He was also a trustee of Richmond Academy. So those often are called the trustees of the town. They were really our town planners in those early years. Where are we going to put the church? Where are we going to build the houses? Where are we going to run the roads? But in 1783, he was the chairman of those trustees when they chartered an institution of learning, the Academy of Richmond County. It still has students today. That's the 5th oldest public school in the nation. Founded by this man who thought education, he had to have felt that education was that foundation that gave you all those possibilities.
This has been such a wonderful visit to Meadow Garden, and we have barely scratched the surface. I certainly want to encourage everybody who's never been here,
come for a tour,
as I have never been here, to just come here because it really is inspiring. As I said, it's aspirational. We've been doing the interview in the with the 3 signers from Georgia, looking over your shoulder here.
They keep me straight. The fellows keep me straight.
The fellows keep you straight.
Always.
So the one in the middle, of course, is our guy, George Walton. But this has been such a wonderful visit. Thank you for having me out. How can folks find out more about what this project is and what you continue to do here at Meadow Garden?
Well, certainly through our website, historicmeadowgarden.org, has everything and connects you to everything. Lets you know we're open Monday through Friday for tours. And also through our social media. You can also be found on Historic Meadow Garden on Instagram and Facebook. So you'll get to maybe see some video of the scaffolding, which is currently on the building, and the preservation work we're doing. Sometimes you'll get to see us weed in the garden. We do it all here, but a great way to follow along with us and connect with us through history.
Well, and you have certainly an ongoing project right now. We may have to come back and do another episode too, because you have so much exciting stuff going on. You actually have a Walton documents project that you're working on, and where you're trying to collect the writings and the correspondence of George Walton that shows his connection to the early leaders, the ones to the big kahunas, as it were, the Jonathan, John Adams, and the Thomas Jeffersons. This guy moved among them, and you're trying to collect his correspondence and his documents to further flesh out that history. And then, of course, as you said, you're adding modern conveniences to this historic home here. I cannot. We have to come and do another episode because
we're trying to preserve it for another 125 years or more. We want to keep it here for our children and grandchildren too.
Well, I must say this has been an incredible visit. I think it's a perfect part of our 3-part series here in Augusta. RANSOM SCHWERZLER, thank you so much for having me here and allowing me to get my history nerd fix for this episode. Really.
Thank you.
And I want to encourage you all to follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. I also want you to encourage you to check out the video version of this. You can actually see the signers watching over RANSOM as we speak. We check it out on YouTube, and join us next week as we explore another location here in downtown Augusta as a part of our Staycation History Tour here on Off the Front Porch. Thank you so much for being a part of this.